Hey friend, listen. I know the world is scary right now. Corruption, war, inflation, demographics, degeneracy, disease, unrest, hatred, and despair. We didn't come here to tell you how it is, but that it's going to get way better.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted, just wait and see.
Better by Bitcoin. Nice. Love it.
Always good.
So
Always
glad we got that going. Really puts you in the right headspace, especially considering, all the drama and all the insanity and all the other ridiculous things that we got going on.
There's stuff going on in Bitcoin. I didn't
Stuff going on.
this.
Stuff going
Didn't
on.
anticipate this.
Yeah. So we're back on the show, Better by Bitcoin. We are going to, we did this at the top of the week, but we kind of want to revisit it again. And it's just talking about the Bitcoin, the debate about the filters and what's happened and like what it means. Because a lot of different people, there seems to be a disconnect in the conversation. People on one side are kind of hearing one thing. People on the other side are hearing a different thing. Right. And so people on both sides, they're not really talking to each other. They're just talking past each other on both sides. It's a very, interesting dynamic and worth exploring, worth trying to flesh out and understand at a deeper level. So JD, got you back. You are remote today, which is working through
My
it.
phone dies. Whoops. I charged it for this, but we'll see. Like away from every charging orifice. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, well, we can we'll go a shorter episode. Let's try.
We'll make it work.
Yeah. So the debate. I'll try and introduce the debate this time. You introduced it last time. You had some good things to say. You went on some epic rants. I'm going to try and introduce it this time. Try and get, lay some groundwork, and then I'll pass it off to you to see, where you're at in your headspace about the current state of things. So, Mechanic, Grass-Fed Bitcoin, right? That's the guy. He was essentially kicked off of the Bitcoin Core repo for posting a comment about, I forget what the exact comment was, but it raised the question about, well, maybe there's a conflict of interest here, right? That was the one.
Yeah.
And the consequences of that were that he gets kicked off the repo. He can okay, cool. But it really drew attention to, well, what was he commenting about? Well, he was commenting about the fact that they're trying to remove a filter on the op return setting, not change the filter, but remove the ability to have a filter at all, right? Remove a setting from the CLI tool for Bitcoin D, Bitcoin D. Okay, well, gee, that could be bad. That could be good. What's the deal with this filter? Why does this matter? Okay, so the filter says it sets a limit for a valid transaction that your mempool will recognize, and that limit is something like 83 bytes. So if your op return opcode had a value that was more than 83 bytes, it would be an invalid transaction according to your node, and therefore you would automatically have this setting as a filter, and you'd filter out transactions that violated that rule, right? So if they're removing the filter entirely, that allows anybody to set any bit amount on an op return and just go ham, whatever. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that this affects block space. Now, if every transaction has this massive block of meaningless text or JPEG, wizard dick pics, well, you're going to run out of block space really soon, or faster than you would otherwise. And the consequences of that are that nodes become more expensive to run. If nodes are more expensive to run, the system becomes more centralized. We covered this last week, or not last week, the beginning of this week. And so there is a practical consequence for just removing the filter. It kind of cascades into this bigger thing, right? Now, some of the pushback has been, well, bro, they're already doing like, okay, op return, you can fill it with spam. Well, they're already doing spam. Okay, so if they're already doing spam, well, then what difference does it make that we remove the filter at all, right? And you get into these like what ifs and this way and that way and how much and quantifying it and all this other stuff. And it just becomes this really long, prolonged thing. But the unfortunate part about it, or, you know, depending on your perspective, is that I think at this point in the debate, we're now looking at, there's two sides of the argument. One that says that it's almost like a, I don't know if the right word is ontological, but it's like a teleos kind of like, what's the meaning of Bitcoin, right? Like, what's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this? Like, what's this all about, right? So the high level debate is now, or this debate has now escalated to a high level debate. What's the purpose of Bitcoin, the telos, which is on one camp, they're basically saying it's a technical, this is a technical thing that because they're using it anyway, it doesn't matter. And let's just be honest about what the code can and can't do. And what, like, if we can push all this stuff in this area, well, then that's going to be safer and have all these other technical kind of things. And then the other side, the other camp basically takes a different, like a completely different tact, a different telos, which is the Bitcoin is money. And because Bitcoin's money, that means that it should be filtering out every single possible thing that is not money. Therefore, it makes no sense that we would, one, think it's okay to remove the filter, two, think it's okay to just change whatever the setting is on the filter at all, right? So one camp is basically saying, if this goes through, the telos of Bitcoin changes. And the other camp is saying, this has nothing to do with the telos at all. This is strictly a technical change. Now, I don't know if I introduced that well or put it succinctly, but that's kind of where I see it presently. JD, does that line up with where you're at and what you know about this debate?
Yep, and I have some background on this. I'm going to be muting and unmuting, and I think you may have a text of somebody who might be able to join if you want to tell them to jump in. But yes, that sounds accurate, and I think it's an interesting debate because it's one of those moments where it's kind of like, you know, you go into the doctor for a solution to, it's like, oh, I have like this pain in my arm or whatever it is. Or actually, I'd probably say it's like more akin to maybe the way I have heard of a lot of people who've gotten lymphoma or like have been discovered that they had like some type of lymphoma. I was like, oh, I was like sick for a long period of time, and I went in, and then they're like, I just think I have a cough, and then they end up going, it's like, oh, dude, you have like stage 4 lymphoma, like you're about to die. And I'm using that as an example because it's like something really, really, like, it's not about the filter. It's the whole thing where the filter just kind of brought to light something that had really needed to be solved but wasn't really solved. And it
Been
sounds like a
scary.
conversation that actually happened, you know, when you and a lot of other folks, 'cause like I'm still, you know, a baby and learning all this stuff, but during the block size war, which was a discussion around the fundamental premise of, is Bitcoin money or is it a database, right? Because that's kind of what the my understanding of the big changes for the big blockers would have essentially done, because it would have made this problem exponentially worse if this was now gone and then we had even bigger blocks than we have now. And so, yeah, that's kind of, I think the top line is they're kind of talking across each other because each of them is approaching it from a different way. Somebody's approaching it from this is what the code can do, and somebody's approaching it, but why? And so it's like neither of them I would say is wrong, but they do have to have a shared conclusion to solve the problem.
Yeah. And I think having this debate on Twitter doesn't lend itself well to, just because I mean, we got into this last week too, but like there's so much nuance to Bitcoin, and you literally you can't just be like thank God for Luke's contributions, and guy's brilliant, etc. But when he says that when you are adding spam to my node, you're raping, like that's rape. It's like, bro, that's a lot of
agree with that,
hyperbole.
but we can keep, I do agree with that, but
like it's a lot of hyperbole that doesn't, like, if it, like, okay, great, you believe that that's the case, but it's taken in context with everybody else watching online and figuring out, it's like that is not the right like way to sell your point, right? Like you may believe that's fine, that can be totally justified in your head, but it's not the right like way to sell that point. Now therefore Twitter has a there's a problem in terms of the medium that allows us to get through this, because in Luke's mind it's totally a valid point. Anton, what's up, man? We're live, by the way.
So there we go. And as I mentioned,
so one of the things that comes out of that is like, okay, well, you really have to get the nuance. And again, Twitter doesn't do the nuance very well. So it's good to have a conversation like this. It's good to do offline and just kind of like, or sideline like talks. JD, you and I have been going back and forth on text, which I think is super helpful. Like allows you to like actually get into somebody's headspace and all this other stuff. But one of the things that I think is fascinating is just, again, that the missing each other piece, right? Like when Luke says this is rape, well, bro, like somebody's going to take that and just be like, actually, you know what? Fuck you. So like, there's no debate there. There's no argument there, right? As opposed to a more level-headed, hey, how do we like get into this and get into this correctly, and like actually pose an argument and actually refute the argument, and not just like attack the person or whatever the thing is, right? So that like, and then all the plebes and everyone else just like losing their minds over whatever the thing is, and just like, oh my goodness, you got to try and keep a even head on it. Yeah, it's fun.
Never a
times.
dull moment.
Yeah.
Quick recap, Anton, if you didn't have a chance to hear the top of it, but basically the core of the discussion today is the fact that the two sides are kind of talking past each other. One is talking about technical, one is talking about cultural aspects of Bitcoin. But then I would say that the big deduction for me is, even though they're talking past each other, they actually do have to have an alignment, in my particular case, on the culture side of the equation. Because the culture, in my mind, is the North Star. And by culture, I mean story. If you get the story, is it a medium of exchange and store of value, or is it a, like my premise would be Bitcoin is a store of value, medium of exchange, period, full stop. Or is it a database? And that is, in my mind, the crux of this story argument is it's a database or it's this. And I think that's kind of what Mechanic and these guys are saying. And there really can't be, it has to be one of the two. It can't, it is a binary, is the net. Do you have any quick thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. Bitcoin was made to be money. It was made to be a peer-to-peer digital currency. It has the ability to put things like smart contracts on it and things like that. Satoshi didn't know when Bitcoin was created that there would be 20,000 altcoins. The altcoins can be used for all kinds of experimentation.
Conservative estimate.
Yeah. It's infinite, really. I mean, it can be infinite. You can just copy and paste the code and like it sort of exists. But we have all these altcoins to experiment on. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin needs to have every single thing that is possible that you can put on an altcoin. And the question that I have, and I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are on this, is if we get it wrong, because ultimately we're not in control of what happens. Like the three of us are not in control. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Is there any danger to Bitcoin if the wrong decisions are made, like legitimate danger to the future of Bitcoin existing?
So, I mean, from a technical perspective, you'd really have to go down and you have to make assumptions about hard drive costs, like what it costs to run a node. You have to make, because you can't really ultimately, like, you can predict into a few years, but then there's economic catastrophes, random tariffs, as we're seeing, and all sorts of other unknowns that could affect the price of a hard drive cost and the price of ultimately a node cost. However, in Bitcoin, there are knowns and they're known knowns. It's like, well, okay, we know that if every block is always full, that means that there's going to be 210 gigabytes of information added to the blockchain every year if every block is always full, right? That's a hard, this is what it is. There's nothing that anybody's going to be able to do to change that. That's in that worst case scenario. Presently, we have blocks that are whatever. I don't know what it was today. I think I checked it yesterday, but it was the average block was something like 1.6 megabytes. Yeah. So 1.6 megabytes is not even halfway to 4 megabytes. And 4 megabytes is when you get the 210 gigabytes per year. Okay. So we are presently, and obviously the mempool is getting flushed out regularly. Maybe not regularly, but it was flushed out recently, which is great. Fantastic. Now, to your original question, are there real like dangers to this? Well, you can do the math on it. What's your assumption about hard drive costs, right? Storage costs for this stuff. If your assumption is that a generous assumption that says something like, well, it's going to be 8% decrease in the cost of solid state storage per year for the next however many years. Well, then there's no world in which year over year, the cost of storing Bitcoin is more expensive than the previous year, because the cost grows linearly, and so the cost of the Bitcoin blockchain grows linearly, whereas the reduction in costs for the solid state hard drives are reduced at an exponential rate. 8% this year, 8% the next year, 8% the year, 8%, it just goes on and on, right? And I know it's not exponential, it's something like exponential decay or logarithmic or something, but you compare these things, it's like, okay, these are not comparable. In the worst case scenario, they're not comparable. But if your assumption is that like we're going to have like crazy tariffs and things are going to get way worse, then it might make sense to say, well, maybe the cost of hard drives like go up, right? Like 2%, 4%, I don't know, 150%. Well, that's going to be real problematic to run a node, right? Also, the cost of transmission. Like you have to be able to sync a node in a certain amount of time, or else it's just not worth it for anybody. Like syncing a node, for instance, on a spinning Rust hard drive, like will take you forever at this point. I don't know how long it takes, but it takes forever. It's such a long time. It's crazy, like unbelievable. So like on my node I have here at home, I killed one of my containers and respun up a Bitcoin node. It took me about maybe 17 hours to sync the whole blockchain in an IBD. So that gives you an idea of where we're at. It's like, yeah, 17 hours, that's pretty good. I've gotten, in years ago, I remember getting like 25 hours or like 2 weeks and like on a hard drive or on a spinning Rust hard drive. And then like, you go through those, like I've had, if you set the cache to super big, you can get it in 8 hours and like all this other stuff. So that's just like the practical stuff with the node. Does this affect what's, well, okay. So you got to look at the cost. Well, okay. If all the blocks are full and all these costs are going up, well, how much are they going up by? Like put some numbers on that. Okay. So maybe it costs like, I don't know, $8,000 in 10 years to run a node. It's like, okay, what's inflation going to be like in 10 years? Like how much is that accounted for there? It's like, there's a lot that goes into this equation, right? So for me personally, what are the costs? It's like, well, the bandwidth costs and hard drive costs, and the consequences of those costs. I don't think they go up at a rate that's just super crazy. I think that there's still going to be enough people to be able to afford this stuff. Now, do we like enough people that can afford to run a node? But is that what we want? Or do we want to be able to have more people run nodes? We want to make nodes far more affordable, right? So that's the technical perspective. JD, you have a different perspective because you're way more in tune with the cultural side of it. So I want to hear your the cultural side, the cultural argument.
Yep. Yeah,
In
I
terms
think
of
I think
costs.
you gave a good breakdown. And actually, I think what I'd love to actually, I'll give the cultural side of it, and then I'd love your take on this too, Anson. But the cultural side of it is, and this is the take that the mechanic was making, is I think the thing that people are missing. Because at the end of the day, people are invested in Bitcoin, and I'm saying invested in Bitcoin because now we have institutional buyers buying this money because it is money. They don't care about block space. They don't care about all this stuff. They are going to be institutionally incentivized to start doing things that will make them more money. So I do understand that aspect of things. But in my mind, that is actually why it is imperative to get the North Star of what it is airtight, because that's how you're going to go through and do everything. Like a few quick stories on this would be like the first one would be MySpace, right? Nobody uses MySpace anymore. Why? Because the story died. The story from MySpace became you use MySpace, like originally it was, oh, you can use MySpace to connect to your friends. But it was originally you can use it to connect to your fans if you're a band, and you can start like going out there and, because I remember the band that I was like with when I was in high school, they like used it to show all of their events where it's all going to be. And so the story is like, oh, it's a great place for you to connect with your fans and grow your audience. Like that was the story. But then the story became, oh, well, there's a better place to do connecting with your fans and everything. It's called Facebook. And then MySpace just died because people just became disinterested with it. And so I think the 2140 end of Bitcoin issuance schedule does actually have to be a part of this calculus, because we need a story that's going to be 100-year story for Bitcoin. Period. That's fully my belief on this. And Bitcoin as money is a 100-year story. I do think the story needs fine tuning, and I actually think that's why it's so imperative. Like people like us who are in entertainment are now kind of coming in now. Like we were too regarded to understand this in the beginning, and so we don't get to reap the rewards of that, right? That's fine. Okay, cool. Like we are the second wave of comers to this, or like the 40th wave if you're actually like looking at it. But that's how it was supposed to be, because we are not here to protect the technical fundamentals, which I do think need to be debated. And I think that was the bigger piece in this, is they blocked Mechanic and Luke, who has more commits to Bitcoin than anybody in existence outside of Satoshi. Or I mean, he has more than anybody in existence, but it's like the number one contributor to all of Bitcoin was blocked from commenting on this thing, right? And he is a contributor, because the Jameson Lop was like, they're only blocking like non-contributors. And Luke's like, I happen to be the number one contributor, and they've blocked me. So where I'm going with this though is the story is the most important thing. And it's like the Christianity story, right? The Christian story is that Jesus Christ was fully God and fully man, and was on a cross and died for your sins. And 3 days later, he rose again. That is it. Jesus, the simplest version of it is Jesus died and rose from the dead. If that is not true, then Christianity is not true. And so it needs to be something as simple as that in my mind. And so landing the plane on Bitcoin, and then Anton, I'd be curious your take. Bitcoin is, and I think there needs to be like a moniker like this. It's like Bitcoin is the medium of exchange and store of value for the digital age. Like, and I do think money or monetary, or like the monetary network, like the preeminent monetary network that is a medium of exchange and store of value for the digital age, needs to kind of get codified and put out there, because that lens will be how everyone filters everything. So all those technical arguments will have to go through that filter of what the story is, what you're trying to accomplish, before they get to the other side. in what I said, I think it's really hard to put monkey JPEGs into that framework. Like I see no way to make monkey JPEGs work in medium exchange or store value. And so yeah, but that's my take. That's my thing. Is I think the story now has kind of come to light as the most important thing. And I think we need to solve that problem. And that's why I'm excited actually personally to be adding to this space. But what's your take, Anthony?
Yeah.
People are very impatient, and I understand. They want, yeah, I mean, lots of people want various things from Bitcoin. They want, I kind of want fiat money to fail and for Bitcoin to be what we use to transact value. And we're not there yet. You can't buy a house currently in the United States and just pay see a house on Redfin and then pay for it with Bitcoin. There was a time period where you could do that with a Tesla. You can't even do that anymore. It's like, I want that future, but that doesn't exist yet. And we know, together, we don't talk about the price of Bitcoin a lot. We talk more about the philosophy behind it. The price is important. And part of the reason why it's important is because Bitcoin is a mathematically scarce asset. And as it becomes more and more scarce and more distributed into the hands of more people across the earth, the value of it is going to go up in a fairly predictable fashion. And so that's hard for a lot of people who just want to get rich really quick off of Bitcoin to wait for that. And so what I see happening is people are trying to force every single feature possible onto Bitcoin before waiting 10, 15 years for Bitcoin to be much, much more valuable. And that's a completely understandable human impulse. But I find it very annoying, just personally, knowing everything, the history of what's happened so far in Bitcoin, because
it's
kind of been, it's been done over and over again. It's like when you've been in it for a while and you've bought into cloud mining, or you watched NFTs become ordinals and whatever, like one thing after another. It's like, you just see everything as a scam, and you just want the newcomers to understand that everything is a scam, and yet they just seem to not understand it. And so it's like Groundhog Day, where we just keep experiencing this over and over and over again because everybody is greedy and everybody wants to get rich quick. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I just find the whole thing so annoying. I wish it didn't exist, and it's a little bit out of our control. So at this point, I'm just kind of watching it happen, kind of knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'm not existentially scared for Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, because that's, in many ways, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it too, with it, which is to say, when you think about these things on a long, on long time frames, and people coming into this space, I'm hesitant to say, or hesitant to know if they get this yet, but it's the exact same thing you're referencing, Anton. Like, I've been scammed, I've been hacked. Like, I know what that's like, and I know, oh, cool, I've touched the burnt stove. Okay, have those guys touched the stove yet that's burning? Or have they seen anybody touch the stove that's burning, right? I don't know. Probably not. Like, the consequences there are like just profound, because once you touch the stove, it's just you're just going to get burned. And it's like stupid to touch the stove. There's no justifiable reason for it. And when you play that out on a long time frame, because it's all just a scam, and all these people are just going to touch the stove and they're all going to get scammed. Well, what happens when they get scammed? They either quit, or, well, they try and become the scammers, which is a thing, of course. But most of the people are going to touch the stove, and they're going to learn the lesson, which is, don't touch the stove. Just, no, this isn't the way. This isn't the right thing. This isn't, like, it's just going to blow up in your face, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to learn. Like, this is, I think, JD, I mentioned this in one of our texts today, which was like, I would not be surprised if in 50 years, like, not today, definitely not today, but in a long time from now, 50 years, we start to see like community agreement around, oh yeah, obviously we should obviously reduce the block size by like a megabyte, just because that'll like remove some of the spam or cut out some of the chaff of this like horrendous thing that's kind of festering, right? And like everybody just agrees except for the whatever marginal like 1% scammers who are like relegated to the sidelines anyway, right? Like they have no voice because they've lost all their money and they can't afford to have a voice anymore. It's like in 50 years, yeah, that's where I see it. It's like this issue kind of like in my head kind of resolves itself at that point.
I think that's an interesting take, but here's my opposite side of that though. Nothing ever resolves itself. Somebody somewhere needs to make a choice. You know, and as a perfect example, it's like I have a garden right now, and Mechanic made this argument in his thing, but it's like if you have a garden, you know, you don't just give up weeding it because you know that more weeds are going to come. Like you have to tend it. You have to actually do it. And I think this actually goes to the argument of like the Second Amendment thing about, somebody, it's always the NIMBY type thing where it's like, well, somebody else will solve that problem. Well, somebody else will solve that problem. Well, somebody else will solve that problem. And I think the problem we have in our current world is we're too removed from violence. I do think that in the medieval world, when people were literally just like mauled constantly in these like really
constantly
violent
in duels,
conflicts.
I challenge you to a duel.
Yeah, right. But it's like it forced you to, one, be really good at a skill like shooting a gun, or two, be really cunning and good and apt at your articulation, which is part of why we're doing this, right? So we can get better at it. But where I'm going with this is 1 degree off. If I'm trying to go to Australia and I start in Los Angeles and I just basically set the direction, this should get me straight to Australia. But if I'm 1 degree off and I don't touch the rudder the entire time, I will probably end up in Antarctica. Or if I'm 1 degree off, I will end up in Japan. And so the issue with this is the necessity, because I will call it necessity, of a discussion around the greater endpoint. Because if we do get the endpoint wrong, we risk ending up nowhere. And that would actually be worse in my mind for Bitcoin, which is like I would venture to say what Luke and what Jason and what Mechanic are all kind of saying is that if Bitcoin becomes not money and just becomes a database, 50 years from now, it will be worthless. It will be worthless because, again, it's going to be a MySpace. Or another good example for people right now is Six Flags, right? Like, why is nobody going to Six Flags? Because they have a shitty story. That's it. That's the brass tacks. Fundamentally, Six Flags and Disneyland are the same place. They are the same place. They are a place you go to ride a ride. However, Disney has done a great job at crafting the story. Like I went actually on the website for Six Flags today because I was talking to someone else about this, and I was reading their mission statement. Go online and read the mission statement for Six Flags. You can read that entire mission statement and not feel a thing. Not feel a thing, because like volunteerism and like
Nice.
all these big buzzwords, right? It's like this was literally written by a committee in a room that was ticking a bunch of boxes. But what's Disneyland? We are the happiest place on earth.
Yep.
I don't know about you, but I want to go there. I want to go there more than I want to care about volunteers who do whatever.
So
right?
I actually have an interesting take on putting story as the most important thing, like the story is king idea for this. And that is story is king, like with regard to film, like absolutely. You don't have a film without a story. JD, you probably take that even further and you could probably say something like, you don't have a business unless you have a story, right? Like you don't have a, like in its extremes, you might even say something like, you don't have a family if you don't have a story, right? Because, oh, we're not on the same page. We're like no mission, no like connected, no shared values.
Without vision, the people perish. Proverbs.
Exactly. Yeah. So Is that the case with Bitcoin? Now, this is a very strange question because you again, getting back to the T-loss thing, what is Bitcoin? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the whole thing? Like, how does this blah, blah, blah? It just goes on and on and on. Now, I might argue that it's not about this, like, or no, you're right. It is about the story. Story is king, but the story, there's two stories with regard to money. There's always going to be two stories with regard to money. Like with a business, there's the one story. Hey, what do we exist to do? We're here to be the happiest place on earth. That's the story. Bam. Okay, cool. With money itself, you have to process, like you could have, think about it like this. Gold. Our story is to like human civilization and flourishing and all this, like all of human civilization was built on us. And, you know, you could probably spend a few hours and come up with the absolute mind-bogglingly best tagline for gold that completely explains the story of gold, right? And you could do that very well and nail it and just, this is gold, this is what it does. Like, come on, everybody, get on board. But there's a problem because the practical technicality of gold, using it physically, like as gold, like invalidates the story. Like the story for gold is not is not something you put on top that you can try and build towards, right? Like with Disneyland, yeah, half the park was shut down because it was under construction, right? That's not the happiest place on earth. But when the stuff comes back online, it's going to be awesome and you're going to know because you're going to go, right? Like it's like a whole thing. But with gold, you can't do that. With Bitcoin, it's exact same. So the story of Bitcoin, and this, I think this applies to maybe, and this is all theoretical, flying off the top of my head, maybe this applies to all technological innovation. Because you can have the story that says this is the thing that's going to solve all your problems, right? Or whatever it is. The Theranos, or not Thanos. Thanos, this we're going to solve cancer and it's all a total scam. Okay. So with Bitcoin, it's like, here's the question. How far can you push where the story doesn't matter? Because the technology is the thing that actually matters. Because when you use Bitcoin, it's a better money than gold. It's a better money than USD. And here's the technical reasons. It goes faster. It's more secure. It is like far more easier to defend. It has like all of these qualities that it might not make it into the story. They might not make it into the culture. They might not, like somebody might not internalize those and just think you can do wizard dick pics or whatever. But like, this is the fundamental value over here and the story that you can use with that. The guy holding Bitcoin in his head and crossing a border is a way like that. You can't write a story like that, right? That's a fundamental nature of the protocol. These are the qualities of Bitcoin itself. So
you give me, and actually let me jump in here for 2 seconds, Anthony, because I
Yeah,
want you
no,
to
no,
take
no.
this, but
Keep
like
on.
you hit me with the one thing that like, so here's the one side of the Bitcoin argument in this story sense that I would say Jameson and those guys are getting correct, which is Bitcoin is unassailable property rights for everyone. And like the thing that I had in my mind was with no barrier to entry, right? Or rather, very little barrier to entry. You do a phone and also. But
Permissionless.
yeah, the thing that I had in my head though was Bitcoin is the monetary network for the digital age that makes the world smaller. And I hate all the words in there. Like it needs to be something grippier than that. But it's like this is a brainstorm. We got to get this out there. But it needs to be one of those things where the point of this is the story needs to be so compelling that people are like, forever, I want to work on that. Like I can say words like Apple, and you think about Apple, and like, what does Apple conjure up in your mind? Secrecy. It conjures up an insane attention to detail, right? All of the lore. Like this was literally why I started Cypherpunk Cinema, was building Bitcoin lore. And I think this is where we are. I think honestly, what this watershed moment is a kind of the canary in the coal mine, being like, we need to build this lore or Bitcoin will fail because it will be co-opted by someone. And so I'm curious your take, Anson.
Yeah, the story is incredibly important with Bitcoin. In fact, I would venture to say that without the lore of Satoshi, I don't know if Bitcoin would be where it is. There's a lot to that. And I was just looking in the white paper and I did a search for the word trust, and the word trust is in the white paper 14 times. And if you think about the idea of betrayal, like every soap opera is about a betrayal. And so story is kind of built into the, I can't even say it without saying the story of Bitcoin, because the development of it and the history so far has been full of drama. The thing that made me look it up was I was trying to figure out where this quote came from. It's from the P2P Foundation. So this isn't from the Bitcoin Talk Forum. So I'm not sure where Satoshi wrote this, but it was written on February 11th, 2009. He said the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. So Satoshi's own story about Bitcoin is about the betrayal by central banks of our trust. And so Bitcoin is a solution
So good.
to betrayal. And so story is built into Bitcoin. And yeah, it's just easy to forget all of that and to just take for granted that Bitcoin is here now and not feel a loyalty to what Bitcoin actually is. And that's when we become the betrayers. And that's very possible because our hearts are so
Yes,
greedy.
indeed.
And it's why Bitcoin's so beautiful, because Bitcoin is just math and it's code and it's hardwired. And as much as we want to betray it, because we are these greedy, sinful creatures that want it all for ourselves and want to get rich quick and just want to have more than other people, Bitcoin doesn't allow us to do it. It's like every time somebody tries to spam the Bitcoin network, all of a sudden the fees go up. And every time somebody tries to pull money out because the price has gone up, then the price goes up and they lose. It's like everything you do to try to fight and trick Bitcoin naturally has a built-in code to fight against that. And that's part of the thing that's so beautiful about it.
And in fact, that kind of wants me to, or causes me to jump into like, how does this get better? Where does this get better? Like, like what are we doing about this that makes it better? How does Bitcoin make this better? And I think that is such a fantastic point because, bro, we were 100% betrayed for like 100 years by central banks. From day one, we were betrayed. And because of Bitcoin, we no longer have to suffer that betrayal. We no longer have to participate. We no longer have to suffer inflation. Like, bro, like, and you want to do fucking wizard dick pics? Like, dude, grow up. Come on.
I think it gets better, and I think what's actually interesting in that is like you conjure up the image of Jekyll Island and the monetary debacle that we're in, right? Because that was a betrayal of all people by the bankers, right? The central bankers knew that they could take over the monetary system from the Austrians and make it a fully Keynesian style economic system that was inflationary, that they could control with monetary levers with Jekyll Island, and they just slowly swung all the votes to do that. And I would say what's interesting about this whole story debate, though, is I think there is a corollary to be made that you know shoving a bunch of stuff into op return is essentially akin to um, a form of inflation, and it's akin to a form of coin clipping, because in like if you're looking at it as a monetary network, you are limiting somebody's ability to get a transaction in a block, and you are limiting somebody's ability to do the monetary facilitation of what Bitcoin is. And so I do think Luke's term is inflammatory intentionally, of like, you are raping my node. but I don't think he's wrong for that reason. Because at the end of the day, it's like I am trying to facilitate the monetary exchange or store of value in the digital age to make the world smaller and better. And if you are doing that against my will because you're exploiting a technical, you know, it's a technical flaw essentially in the code, which again is like it's valid, right? I'm not saying it's invalid, but it's incongruous with the story he believes, and I think that's the key here. Is like it all comes out of the story you believe. Is it a big? Is it a database, or is it a money? Landing the plane on that is it gets better because we're having this discussion. I do think clarity from this discussion will set things up, and I'm hoping for the better for the next 1,000 years.
I have never thought about trying to increase the block size or trying to make transactions faster or trying to make fees cheaper as a form of inflation or a form of coin clipping. And it's a really good analogy. I mean, if you think about it, it's like we think, oh, hard drives just get cheaper and cheaper and just get bigger and bigger. Why not just make the blockchain bigger and bigger, make the fees lower, make transactions faster, and we can, but that literally means you have to pay more for hard drives. You have to update your node. And I'm speaking as somebody who's completely non-technical about this. So fill me in if I say something wrong, but I'm thinking right now about like the continent of Africa and how hard it would be to get the components to build a node in some of those places. And you want nodes, you want as many nodes as possible. You want them to be everywhere. Why are we causing inflation on the cost of running a node when it's unnecessary to do so? We've been so brainwashed by inflation that we literally think we have to create it ourselves. And now we have Bitcoin where you have deflation, where the value actually increases over time. And here we are trying to cause inflation. It's like we've been Stockholm syndromed into thinking we just have to have inflation when we don't anymore.
100%. And that really touches, I think, so much of this particular debate. Like there are so many, JD, I mentioned this in some of the text messages. It was like, wait a second, like this idea is like super high time preference. Like it's the end of the world, bro. That is so high time preference. Like there's gonna be some time between now and then. It's not 100% right now, right? All like other things about it, just like very high time preference. Like this like black and white nature to it is like, whoa, that's really high time preference too. What if there is like shades of gray here? Like what if like, hey, how do all of these things come about? But no, we're trained in this mindset of like this ultra you versus me. We have to fight. We have to like one of us has to die. Like it's just that's what it has to be. It has to. Like there's no world where you and me can possibly exist because literally we're a trained Stockholm syndrome. We're trained by inflation to believe these absurd things about everybody who's around us, that they exist to suck value out of our lives, because everything we've all only ever known is that, well, when I get a job, they're going to suck value out of my life. When I get married, it's just my marriage is going to suck value out of my life. When I have kids, they're just going to suck value out of my life. Everything just sucks value. There's no such thing. And it's all because of inflation. And we're just so wrapped up in it. And it cuts on every single, like it cuts in ways like I don't even know how it cuts me. Like I cuss all the time. That's probably because of inflation, right? Like there's all sorts of stuff. It just goes so many places. And we're on generation like 4 of this, right? It's inflation affected my dad, and I learned from my dad. Inflation affected my grandpa, and my dad learned from my grandpa, and I learned from my dad. It's just like, it just goes on. It's mind-boggling. Total Stockholm syndrome.
One thing I will say though, for me personally, is I do actually think it needs to be black and white though. And the reason I say that though is because it's like, and I say this not in a derogatory sense, but just look at African American culture in the United States. it's really degraded from, again, like people go like, oh, you're gonna get into slavery. And so like, I understand there are like, complications with how African American culture came to America, right? So let's start there. But the binary of making abortion legal, but not just illegal, but like a non sequitur, like a societal non sequitur of like, oh, it doesn't really matter, kind of thing. It's like just like it's just like, it doesn't matter. And then some of the things we're seeing now with the marriage debate of being like, it doesn't matter. Like that is a degradation of the foundation you're standing on, which comes back to the whole thing of like, we do need to get this thing right in terms of the story, the foundation we're building on. Like I do believe it needs to be, is it a monetary medium of exchange and store of value, or is it something else? Because I do think it's not airtight and binary. It's got to be black or white. We're going to get to that 1% drift that 50 years from now, we're going to end up in Japan when we want to go to Australia.
There's I don't know what song this is. I was trying to find this. I was trying to use Grok the other day. So maybe if somebody hears this, they can tell me what this is from. There's this rap song. It's probably late 90s or early 2000s. And you know how sometimes at the beginning of a rap song, they're just shouting stuff out. They're like not rapping yet. They're just like talking. And in this song, they say, we be spending it how we get it. Meaning we get it fast and we spend it fast. And that's how people have been living. That's the negative of the culture of, things are going to be more expensive later. So if you have any money, you just need to find something to spend it on now, which is so high time preference. And then Bondor, you brought up your dad. Boomers are so, just as a generation, are so bad in the sense that they all plan on having a retirement and spending every last penny to zero before they die. Not thinking like in the Bible, there's a proverb that says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And for the boomers, they were that generation after 1971 when inflation really kicked off. They just watched things getting more and more expensive. And so they were like, okay, I can invest my money in the S&P and I will get a return that beats inflation. But then I'll have this time period. I'll have 20 years or whatever from the time that I retire to the time that I die. And things are going to keep getting more expensive. And so the longer I live, the less time I have to spend this money. And so I just need to make sure that the money lasts until the day I die. And I'm not leaving anything to my kids.
You just broke my brain with a thought that I've never had before. But the current stock market as it exists would not exist without inflation. Period.
Oh yeah, that's like for real. You can actually like plot that out and like go through the whole, like it's a whole thing. All like you plot M0 divided by the stock market, and it's basically just a flat line. It's incredible.
Because
unbelievable.
What's interesting about that thought, though, I'd never thought of that before. That was like the stock market has essentially lulled people into a false sense of growth. It's made people lazy. Because the thing is, like, it's the story of the talents, right? The parable of the talents is essentially the stock market has made everybody the guy with the one talent. Is they've buried it in the ground, and the stock market is the ground. And you're not actually being a good and faithful servant,
Big
steward.
yes. Yeah.
You're literally just being a miserly person that thinks that I can just kind of skate by and do nothing.
Entitled. Yeah. Like I'm entitled to these returns. Like it's bonkers. Okay. So one thing we always got to bring it back to, which is how does Bitcoin make this better? And like for me, it's just so painfully obvious. How does Bitcoin make this better? It literally invalidates and inverses all of this. It basically just says, bro, you can't, like, the inflation thing is garbage. You can't just rely on that. You literally have to build, and you have to sow and reap and participate and like create value for other people. And like, whoa, this is like, we're talking about big changes to the whole thing. I mean, oh yeah, it's good, but
Yeah, otherwise it's like, yeah, put your money in the S&P and give your money over to Raytheon or to Coca-Cola or to Pfizer. Let them make a profit so you can have some of it. Whereas for Bitcoin, it's like, no, I'm not going to participate in inflation at all. And then I'm going to go create value through my own ingenuity and effort. And then I'm going to live off of that value that I create and continue to invest in Bitcoin to take my value out of the NPC inflation economy forever. I'm not going to let them use it anymore. And I'm going to have a low time preference, and I'm going to invest in the things that are truly valuable in life. And
Yeah.
thank God for Bitcoin for that.
Yeah. Bitcoin promotes Bitcoin embodies scarcity. Scarcity promotes stewardship, and stewardship drives value. That's why this gets better. Is if Bitcoin can be the foundation of the exchange layer, i.e. the monetary layer, because that's what we do exchange, right? That's what we exchange. We devised money so we could exchange over a longer low time preference time horizon. I don't have to sell my apples immediately. I can give you this money and then I'll come back later and buy your pies or whatever it is. And so if Bitcoin can become the monetary exchange layer for the digital age, that understanding of scarcity will drive a mentality of stewardship, because you're going to have to think about your money differently. And because you're thinking about it differently, it's going to drive you to add value and be a good steward and make things better.
Yep. And that, for me, that directly ties back into the whole nature of this debate, why we got on this pod in the first place, right? Which was, do we have the wizard dick pics? Bro, like who's adding, like, how is that adding value to anybody on earth? Literally anyone on earth. And the answer is, well, it's only the ultra degenerate high time preference losers who suck at life anyway. You're like, bro, just stop. Just stop it. Michael Jackson meme. Stop. Get some help. Right? Like, now, that's to be distinguished from, I think, from the technical debate, but we can allow for nuance here. And also, bro, Bitcoin is going to alter the culture. Bitcoin is going to, whether you like it or not, it's going to alter the culture. It's going to alter how people value their participation in reality. We're going to do the wizard picks, the wizard dick picks, or I'm going to, like, I don't know, be a good father. Wizard dick picks father. Wizard dick picks father. What's it going to be, guys? In a Bitcoin denominated world, I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's going to be father every time. In a fiat denominated world, it's going to be dick pics most of the time. You get some exceptions, but most of the time, dick pics. And so you really, like, this is why I'm kind of like on the, bringing it back, like with the debate, I'm like, on the long time frames, bro, this, like, Bitcoin just destroys this fiat mentality. As long as we can protect the 21 million hard cap and continue adoption, which I don't think any of those things are really at play here. Yes, node operation and all this other stuff like comes into play, but like, I think that they come into play. Like, it's going to be difficult to run a node way further out in the future because of this than the culture changes. The culture changes, I think, is going to be way sooner, right? We're going to see, like, because and I know this because of my own life, the things I was into, the things that I thought were funny, the things that I thought were cool, like the music I listened to, like all of the movies I watched, like everything about my life is essentially changed because of Bitcoin in a way that is low time preference. Whoa, got to do these things that are like way more responsible and because of Bitcoin, way more cool, as opposed to, oh yeah, I'm just going to smoke cigarettes and bum around 7-Eleven, which is like literally stuff I did in my 20s, right? Like, just totally different world completely. So It gets way better.
I one last thought on this with what something like, and this doesn't even really exist anymore, NFTs. I'm thinking of like the gorilla face things. What that is trying to hustle each other and just gambling on something, playing a game of hot potato. And so rather than going out and doing the things that are valuable, you're sitting there glued to your computer, looking at your little collectible garbage thing that you're just trying to see to make sure that it's not going down in value, to try to pawn it off on the next person, to get it out of your hands before it plummets in value, which is exactly like when Jesus drove out the money changers. What the money changers were doing is they were all just trying to hustle each other with currencies and get them out of each other's hands. They were doing the exact same thing that these NFTs or ordinals or whatever the next iteration of this garbage is going to be. And Bitcoin, with what I think is the game theory of Bitcoin, it punishes you for trying to hustle people or gamble. It rewards you for being low time preference and not gambling and not trying to hustle people. It flips it all on its head. And so, yeah, that's another way that Bitcoin makes you better, is it gets you out of doing degenerate things and out creating value for yourself and for others.
JD, any last words?
I think, yeah, I agree with all that. I think it is, the last take I will have is have a point, have a perspective. I actually think this is the moment where if you want it to be money, you should make it known. And define money, medium exchange, whatever it is. But I think now is the time to start digging in and starting to figure that out. Because again, there's so much potential for good with this, but you have to make a decision that you're going to do something to make things good. Good does not just happen. The world is inherently evil. And so it takes good people standing up and doing things for it to work.
Yep. You have to participate. You cannot sit on the sidelines. For better or worse, you got to participate. All right, guys, this has been Better by Bitcoin. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to Better by Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes everything better. Like, subscribe, and follow us on X at BetterBYBTC, YouTube at BetterBYBitcoin. Not financial advice, mathematical certainty.